All right, ready to roll.
All right. Hey guys, Charles Williams here. I'm principal at Plato Learning Academy located in Chicago Public Schools, District 299, and also the founder of CW Consulting, my own educational consulting group.
Cool. And what do you do with your consulting group? How long have you had this group?
Yes, so it is in its infancy, so it's about a
Hmm.
year old. But through this, I do public speaking. I host workshops to train teachers and leaders and students. And then I also do long-term consulting, so it can be just to kind of get things rolling, or longer term to facilitate policy systems, whatever they may be.
Okay. So if you,
And what they can become. So one of the things I talk about is the counter narrative, because if all the statistics were to prove true, I shouldn't be sitting here right now. So that's one thing, to be able to present that story. On the other side, I miss being in the classroom. I loved being a teacher. I love being an administrator. And so what I find is that when I get to host my workshops and do trainings with teachers, it kind of gives me the best of both worlds. I still get to have that administrator role, but I'm still kind of back in the classroom setting and teaching.
Mhm.
And of course, there's a consulting aspect where I love to be able to help people get through things, because I remember being there. I remember struggling. This is almost 15 years in now. So to be able to guide people through some of the same issues that I've gone through, or just sharing knowledge and updates. I pride myself on trying to stay current, and I know sometimes people have their niches, right, where
Mhm.
their expertise is, and so to share that information. So I would love at some point to be able to get to where this is what I'm doing full time. I love to travel. So,
Mhm.
to be able to incorporate that and just kind of travel around, visit schools all over, even internationally, and just share this information, that would be great.
And how has the response been so far to your organization? Have you been able to have some clients and being able to share your knowledge?
Yeah, so I'm not sure what happened this year, but it has like really kicked off.
Hmm.
I think in January I was a podcast guest on, I think, like 4 or 5 different shows. I've booked a few different things coming up this summer. In fact, I was supposed to be down in New Orleans right now,
Right.
and doing some work down there, but obviously that was disrupted a little bit.
Right.
Um, so in fact, that's one of the things that I'm looking at, because we don't know how long this whole disruption is going to last. So trying to offer some virtual connections, with clients. But yeah, it's not where I want it to be, but it has picked up a lot faster than I thought it would be.
Sure. Very good. Now, for those that are unfamiliar, how would you describe the demographics of CPS or the buildings you work in?
Sure. So, CPS is massive. I mean, it is
Hmm.
home to, tens upon thousands, actually hundreds upon thousands of students. Just this morning we had a webinar with principals, and there were over 1,000 principals on the webinar. So CPS is just like mind-boggling large. Um, but where I'm at, I'm on the far west side of Chicago. It's in the
Hmm.
Austin neighborhood.
Sure.
And so, most of the time, and it's unfortunate, but if you're in this area and you turn on the news, you're probably going to see like Austin or like Inglewood, this area. So it is an area that's stigmatized, as high poverty, high crime, high violence. But you know what? My students are amazing, and a majority of my students come out of this neighborhood. So we are predominantly African American. In fact, we're like 99% African American.
Hmm.
Um, and I have some amazing students. I mean, we talk about valuing education, and they show that on a daily basis. They come to school. We have one of the highest attendance rates across the city. And they come and they perform. I mean, this year has been phenomenal. Um, you think urban school, a high crime area, right? And you start to imagine, some of the movies that are out there, right? The
Hmm.
crazy fights that are happening and the gang affiliations, and you don't see any of that. I think this year we had maybe 3 fights in our building, And two of those were actually my students were walking home, and students from another school engaged them. So we
Right.
have this culture in the building that, certain things, that is not who we are. And so I'm excited, like, uh, there definitely, again, it comes back to that counter narrative, right? There's this dominant narrative about the students on the west side of Chicago, and we are definitely challenging that.
Right. So how has that culture been built? Is it just a number of administrators that have come through and really set that standard of, hey, this is a place where you want to be. We're going to do things the right way. We're gonna grow, and we're gonna make something of ours. How has that culture been built?
So, in fact, I'll be honest. This is my fourth year there.
Hmm.
When I came in, I was the third administrator in 3 years. And so that actually contributed to the, to be frank, the chaos that I walked into.
Hmm.
It was not, organized. It was not the place that it is now. Um, and what we've discovered, what we started off with, and I tell people this all the time, is that we focused on making sure that we were addressing the child holistically. And I know a lot of people talk about that, but that's really what we went in and we did. We have something called the 5 essential surveys, where students answer questions about their school. And it was very clear to us that students didn't feel safe, at school. They didn't feel safe in the neighborhood around the school. When they were at the school, they didn't feel that they were cared for, or that, there were connections. And so we just started working on those things, building up relationships, really focusing on that SEL component, and just pouring into our kids. And, we didn't do a lot with academics initially. I should say, we started there and we didn't see changes. So we put that on hold, and we just poured into our students and really focused on the culture and climate of the building. And it has changed everything. I mean, our test scores are off the charts now, right? Our attendance rating, like I said, skyrocketed. And it was simply because we made school a place where students wanted to be. And because students want to be there, now we have staff members who want to be there. And so when I came in, Dustin, I mean, I would say that more than 70% of my staff were guest teachers.
Mm.
And I don't know how you run a building like that, right? People coming
Right.
in and out, you don't have cohesiveness. Um, and so it was insane. And now this year, I think I had to hire like one or two teachers.
Right.
Like it's vastly different over the course of 4 years. But that's what we had to focus on, was making sure that our students were taken care of. It's that concept, right? You got a Maslow before you bloom, and
Sure.
that's what we embraced.
So, what do you think made the students buy into this approach of caring about the individual? Was it something that they probably hadn't had before and this was new to them? What do you think caused them to buy into it?
So I think it was a number of things. I think the first thing is the fact that this is my fourth year there. As I mentioned, when I came in, I was a third administrator in 3 years, and so they kept asking me, right, when are you leaving? How long are you going to stay here? I remember seeing them over the summer at one of our summer events, and they said, "You're coming back?" I said, "Yeah, I'm not going anywhere." And so I think they needed to see that, like, this guy's not just talking, right? Like I've said before, I have to walk my talk.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what they saw. Like, no, I live in Indiana. And so
Mm-hmm.
I make this ridiculous commute every day. And so I show them through, over and over and over again, I believe in you. These are not just words, right? I could have taken a job anywhere. I could have done anything anywhere, but I believe in the things that we're doing. And so, saying it's one thing, but showing it consistently over and over and over again, I think that has gotten to the point where my students now know, like, Mr. Williams is here for us. He cares about us. He's going to make sure that we're taken care of. And the same goes for my staff. We keep talking about the relationships with students, but as leaders, we have to remember to do the same thing with our staff members. And so I had to make that same level of commitment and dedication to my staff, to where, they trust, the crazy ideas that we come up with, these crazy initiatives. And they say, okay, we're going to do this. And like I said, And I think like this year I lost, a handful of kids, just moving to different districts and things like
Mhm.
that. But it's vastly different.
Right. And so when you had to bring in staff members, what were some of the things you were looking for as someone, hey, this person can be a fit at this building with these students? What were some of the things you were looking for?
So when I interviewed, so it's usually not just me. I
Hmm.
invite people in to interview with me. I love being able to have a student there, which the staff members are like, wait, why is a kid here? And I'm like, they're gonna be with you more than I am. So
Right.
if they're like, we don't feel this person, like it's the kids are gonna be with you. And I think that sends a message right away to the staff member. Plus, I tell them off the bat, I don't want to be a stepping stone. My kids deserve so much more. And then, so if you're looking for a placeholder while you're finding something else, this isn't the place for you. Like, I need you to come in. I need you to be dedicated. I need you to be committed. And I say that off the bat, and I'm like, if that's not who you are, we can end this interview now because I don't want to waste my time or your time.
Hmm.
So I think right away there's this tone that's set about who we are and what we do and those expectations, and we're not going to waver on them. The other thing, of course, that I do is I have my any potential teachers come in and do a model lesson. And they know, and I tell them off the bat again, after they leave, I powwow. I powwow with the students in the room. I powwow with the guest teacher that's sitting in the room who's watching the lesson. It could be one of their peers or one of the coaches, and we powwow when we talk about it. And that's just we look for those connections. I I'm a true believer because I didn't study education.
Hmm.
Um, so I don't think that you have to come from this strong educational background. But if you know your stuff and you have a passion for connecting with kids and delivering content, those I could work on pedagogy, right? I can teach you that. I can't
Right.
teach passion, right? I can't teach dedication. I can't teach those things. So I worry about the instructional practices. I can teach you that, but those are the things that I'm looking for. Do you know your stuff, and do you really want to be here? Those are I think for me, the two most important aspects.
Awesome. Very good. So you mentioned earlier how important SEL strategies are. Where did you learn SEL, and how have you seen it grow in education the past handful of years? Because I'm one, I feel it's absolutely vital. We have to teach the entire child rather than just the academics. Where did how were you taught this?
So, to be honest, a lot of this was self-taught.
Hmm.
Um, like you said, I thought it was important, and so I jumped in, and so and it wasn't just by myself. Luckily for me, I have an entire team who believes in this, an entire team who is dedicated. So we've spent actually the last 2 summers really just diving in and trying to not only understand what SEL is, but also making sure that we have the systems and protocols in place. Just a couple weeks ago, I presented about SEL at IdeaCon in Schaumburg, and the one thing that I think that is often lacking, and my wife's a teacher,
Right.
and I share this stuff with her, and as I was running through my presentation, she's like, wait a minute, go back. And so, Castle, which we use is a foundation. So if anybody's looking for any SEL ideas, definitely recommend Castle.
Okay.
Um, but the whole section it talks about is building capacity in adults. And I think we forget about that, right? We skip over it because we're like, we need to do this for students, and it's right, but we forget that adults have to have the capacity in order to not only teach SEL, but to also, to maintain and model SEL. I mean, if adults, are arguing with each other, if adults aren't managing their own emotions and behaviors, right, it's very hard to expect them then to hold students accountable, right? If I'm getting upset in a classroom and I'm yelling at students, I can't then ask that student, hey, stop yelling at your classmates, because I'm teaching you that this is an appropriate response. And so all too often, I think the reason why SEL either fails or doesn't get the results that it's looking for is because we skip over that adult part, right? We expect these things from students, but then the adults are kind of going and doing their own thing. And so For me, that's what it was. It was just diving headfirst with my team and saying, we're gonna figure this thing out, right? And it's a little awkward when I come across like SEL experts
Hmm.
and they're like, "Where have you been trained? What did it?" And I'm like, "No, I haven't been. It's just itself, right? It is
Right.
a passion for making sure my kids have what they have, and just diving into things. And so that's all it is."
So, what are some of those strategies you have in your toolbox that you use to work with students? So, say you have a student who shuts down and just isn't there. What do you go to help that student?
So, there's so many different things, right? So
Hmm.
one of the things I think for us to run SEL, it talks about explicit and implicit teaching, right? It means blending it into your lesson so that way you can pull SEL examples, right? If we're reading a text, we're like, hey, what about this decision that this character made? Do you think that was the right decision, right? And incorporate SEL there. But then we also do very explicit SEL. I have a social worker and a counselor who will push into classrooms and just we don't. It's not academic, but we'll run a circle, right? Or we teach certain skills, and what we've created is this entire menu of skills. And so each month, each classroom picks a skill that they want to work on. So it might be, good decision making, maybe appropriate distance, right? And appropriate touching, whatever these things might be. And they work on that skill all month long. And so, you know, I know a lot of people say, well, do you do it school wide? And the reality is that every classroom has different needs. And so they work on the skill that they need. Um, but the one thing that I always tell people, and I think regardless of the situation, regardless of the student, you need to be patient and you need to listen. Those I think those are the two most critical aspects, because if you slow down and you understand that a child's trying to work through something and you give them that time to work through that, and then you're also listening to hear what's going on, right? Why are you feeling this way? Then it gives you a better understanding, because more often than not, whatever it is that's going on, there's something underlying, right? I had a student, who was just going on in class. And when I pulled that kid out, he shared it with me. He said, I got into it with my mom this morning. She said, when I go home, I have to pack my stuff. I have to get out of the house. This is a fifth grader, right? So
Right.
now in his mind, when this day ends, I've got to go home, right? I'm not thinking about fractions. I'm not thinking about that, right? That's all I'm worried about. So had I got on him, had I been like, hey, stop, you need to learn, I would never have learned that. So I was able to actually, I called mom, and like I said, Dustin, before, this just who I am. I
Hmm.
called mom and I said, Mom, look. And she said, of course, nothing's going to happen. I said, but here's the situation now at school. I need you to talk to him, right? And so then again, when we talk about the wraparound services for students, it's not just students. We do it with our families. So then we start talking to mom, like, how can we approach this? What's going on? What can I offer you? What type of services? Because the reality is that SEL, anything, is not just in the school, right? We need to extend those connections at home, because if our parents don't have the resources they need, they can't take care of their kids, right? And it trickles through. So not only when we talk about our Plato family, it really is the family. We're not just providing services to our students, we're providing them to the entire family.
Absolutely. Now, what do you do with staff members who may have been more experienced, may not have been brought up in an SCL type or unfamiliar with it? How do you convince them to go this route? I mean, like I said, there are those teachers that are maybe more old school. How did you approach them and say, hey, let's try these strategies, let's do this together?
So I'm a believer in that adults are very much like students. And so there's a few different approaches there. The one thing is that it's always interesting when you have that class or that group of kids, especially in a middle school, right?
Hmm.
They're in one class and that class is rocking and they're rolling and things are happening, and they move into another classroom and it is chaotic, right? And so, the teacher will ask, well, how come, they're not like that in that class over there? Well, let's talk about it, right? Let's meet with the teacher. Let's talk. And so a lot of times there is this mindset of this is hippy dippy, this is, that's not what kids need. But I know that I could drive it home. I know I could, create mandates. This is what you need to do. But the reality is that I know the teachers have to see it working,
Hmm.
right? And once they see it working, more often than not, they're going to say, I'll try something, right?
Hmm.
I, what's it going to hurt? Um, on the other side of it, it's, and I hate to say it this way, but as I mentioned, we have this culture, right? The students in your classroom, which isn't our belief. And so got to the point where that teacher decided this isn't the place for me.
Hmm.
And I think as leaders, you have to be able to say, yeah, I agree with you. We need a better fit here. I don't agree with just changing the entire system because that's what you believe in. And now we have a new person in that role, and it, like, again, it's smooth. It's super smooth. And so sometimes that's what needs to happen. It's a last resort, but you're not going to be able to change everybody.
Sure. Now, I kind of want to switch gears. With a charter
Sure.
school, are you in charge of developing your own curriculum, or do you take it from CPS? How does that work in a charter setting?
Yeah, so we're fortunate that we actually get to build our own. We have the state standards that we have to, address, obviously.
Hmm.
Um, we have access to many of the same resources that CPS has. But what's really nice is that because we're a charter school, and especially a single site charter school, we get to play with that however we want. And so, when about 2 years ago, was it 2 years ago? Yeah. I had a teacher who discovered Engage New York, Eureka Math. And
Hmm.
he came to me and said, I love this thing. Can I try it out? Yeah, sure. Why not? So he did it with his third graders, worked wonders. And so we said, let's pilot this. Let's expand it a little bit more. So the next year we did it for third and fourth grade. So this was last year. Saw again tremendous results. And had I been in a much larger district or a much larger system, I would have had to run that thing all the way up. Then it would have had to come all the way back down. But we can do those things. I often tell my teachers, I'm not the one in the classroom. I'm not the one doing the lessons. So as long as you are, addressing these skills and the standards that need to be addressed, they have a lot of autonomy on how they create those lessons. And some really interesting things have come about it, right? It's I when I first started teaching, I was in that mindset of like, okay, where's my book? I didn't have books.
Hmm.
I had nothing. So I created my curriculum from the ground up. And I think that was the best experience I've ever had because it really taught me the value of not relying on a textbook. And so I tell people all the time, they're like, what textbook do you use? And I'm like, which one? We use a hybrid of materials and we pull things in from all over. Oftentimes it's not just a single textbook. And I don't think that's what schools should be. Um,
Right.
so
Fantastic. So, when you go into a school year or a team of teachers comes to you to develop a curriculum, what is your process? Do you guys just brainstorm ideas? You match the standards for CPS, Illinois? What is the process to do that?
Yeah, so it's a hybrid of things. Obviously everything that we do, is focused on the state standards. And
Hmm.
so Dave Schmittou, I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, but I saw something that he recently tweeted, which I want to try, talking about, going through the standards. But we've done something similar where we identify power standards. And we also use NWEA. So we kind of
Yep.
use these things and we say, okay, what do kids need to know? And what's the best way that we're going to teach them? So, it's almost that backward planning. We're looking at that data and saying, where do we want them to be? Where are they at now? And what can we do to make sure that they're getting there? And so we're small. I mean, we have about 300 kids in our school. So each classroom, each grade level is a single class. So, I'm not in that boat where I can say, hey, my fifth grade team, they're all meeting. But we still do that type of work just across the board where we all sit down and we develop, ideas and lessons and we flush them out. And it's not uncommon for my teachers to be in each other's classrooms during their prep, just observing and helping each other out. But I think that's where it comes. It's very fluid. When I was a teacher, I hated lesson plans. I still do hate lesson plans because I think, you spend hours creating this perfect document, right? And then Tuesday happens, right? It's like,
Right.
well, there that goes. Like, instead, it needs to be fluid. And so I think we've gotten to that comfort level of saying, we're going to adapt these lessons to match my students, to match my interest, to match the situation. My daughters are at a great school here in Cherville, massive school district, great results. But the teachers have binders, and that's their entire year. And I'm thinking to myself, first of all, how do you know how your entire year is planned? And not only that, but that is the binder they use year after year
Right.
after year. I'm thinking, like, there's no way.
And
I
that
mean,
would just get
obviously
so boring
something's
after a
working.
while. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I saw a tweet today that said, if you're bored teaching it, imagine your kids, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Now you mentioned NWEA. We do that as well. Our
Mhm.
ELA and math, they take that once in the fall and then once in the spring. And it's great because I can use their Lexile scores to, for my groupings and different things like that. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of cool that we both use the same, assessment.
Yeah, it's a great tool, but
Yeah.
like I was sharing with someone earlier today, the problem is when it becomes evaluative.
Right.
That's my issue, but it's a great instructional tool.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So, what are some of those assessment practices that you do with your team as far as, prepping them for standardized assessments? What are some things you do to get that engagement from those kids?
So, as I was just mentioning, the MAP test
Uh-huh.
NWEA is used in CPS for most of what we evaluate. It is used to determine if kids are going to the next grade. It is used for teacher evaluation. It is used for school-wide evaluation. And so I think there's this culture around the test um, that people know that it's important, right?
Hmm.
So there's nothing special we have to do. Everybody knows the importance of it, which is really interesting because with the closures, they've announced that we're not doing NWEA,
Right.
and so now everybody's like, well, what's the point? And I'm like, geez, like no, that NWA was not the point, like, but um one of the things that we do is we, like you, right, we do the spring, the fall test. And I know, I wonder who's going to see this, but my secret's out. So every 6 weeks, I'm not sure if you guys use the screeners.
Hmm.
And I know NWEA is like, don't do that, don't use the screeners.
Right.
But we do. Every 6 weeks we did a screener. And that was actually pretty accurate. Like, we were able to track students' progress between the big tests. And it was really nice because students at least knew score wise. The downside, with NWA is it's very detailed.
Oh, yeah.
But the screener doesn't give that level of detail. So in addition, our assessment plan is that teachers have their unit assessments that they utilize. We had like Study Island. We've just adopted IXL because they fell in love with IXL.
Hmm.
But what I told them was that, again, I don't care what assessment tool you're using, but it needs to be standards based. It shouldn't be the end of the unit test at the end of the story, because it's about the story. It should be skill based. And so we use that to really do mastery learning. And so I'm really curious. I want to use this time to learn more about the Teach Better team, their
Hmm.
their graded method.
Yeah.
Um, but we've really adopted this mindset of mastery learning. And so when I heard about, Ray and I were talking about the grid method, and I'm like, I have to learn more about this. Um, it really changes things. I don't believe in teaching to the test, right? If you do what you're supposed to do all year long, when it comes time for the test, kids will take it, they'll do fine.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to do anything special. It's
Right.
just good teaching is going to
Right.
take care of itself.
And speaking of the Teach Better team, Caitlin Giordano, who teaches, I want to say somewhere in the suburbs in Chicago, and I've gotten in touch with her and I've written a guest column for the website. So she's one to reach out to if you're interested in getting your word out and be more in tune with what the team has going on. I really, really like the material they produce.
Okay. Thank you. I
So,
appreciate it.
yeah, absolutely. All right. So, what's next for your school? I mean, you mentioned you have a lot of crazy initiatives. What are some things that you guys are doing and want to keep building towards?
Yeah, so we are definitely moving just partnered with the Chicago Youth Symphony Orchestra. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so now we have students. Well, we did have students, and hopefully when we go back, we'll continue. But we
Sure.
had students who are now participating in this citywide choir. It's just providing opportunities. I always tell people, and I will continue saying it, that I believe that talent is equally dispersed, but
Mm-hmm.
opportunities are not. And so that's really what we're just trying to do. We want our students to have opportunities, to everything. And so when we come up with these ideas, I tell my teachers, right, right, there's that idea. Would you want your kid in your class? Would you want your kid in your school? And so I asked them, like, what are we going to hang our hat on as Plato? What do we got to offer that nobody else has? We tried foreign language this year. And so we were utilizing a company and that failed miserably. But
Mm-hmm.
my students were excited. So it's something that we put a pin in because we want to come back to it and we just need to find a better way of offering it. But it's really saying like nothing's off limits. We want to be able to say, if my kids are like, hey, we want to learn. In fact, they just shared with us before break, they want home ec. They want to
Right.
learn how, those basic skills. They want to know how to sew. They want to know how to cook. And I'm like, all right, let's figure this thing out. I don't know what that's going to look like,
Mm-hmm.
but it's creating those things, that my students need, that my students want, and finding those talents within my staff. So,
Absolutely. Fantastic. Well, you know what, Charles? You do a wonderful job at Plato, and it's been an absolute pleasure talking with you.
well, thank you, Dustin. I'm glad that we're able to see each other face to face.
Absolutely. And I'd
I know we
love to
connect
have
via
you.
Twitter, but this is nice.
Absolutely. I'd love to I'd love to have you write a guest column at some point on my website, and we can touch base again and just go from there. All right.
Absolutely. I look forward to the continued collaboration.
Absolutely. Hey, hope you and your family are doing well, and you have a great night. Okay.
All right, you do the same, Dustin. Take
Yep.
care and
You bet.
go Cubs.
Hey, go Sox.